The UFC has witnessed over 600 main event fights in its 31-year history, but here's something that'll completely transform how you see combat sports. Only 23 rivalries have generated enough pure hatred to transcend fighting and become cultural phenomena. 23. That's less than 4% of all major UFC matchups. But here's what's going to change the way you see the sport forever about these rivalries. They weren't just marketing gimmicks or manufactured drama. Each legendary feud represents years of authentic animosity, personal vendettas, and psychological warfare that created the most explosive moments in sports entertainment history. Over the last 8 weeks, I've been obsessively analyzing every major UFC rivalry, breaking down press conference footage frame by frame, studying social media beef patterns, and conducting interviews with fighters about what really happens when pure animosity enters the octagon. You're about to uncover the raw, unfiltered reality behind the octagon's fiercest battles. By the end of this breakdown, you'll understand exactly why Khabib vs. McGregor generated more global attention than most world championships, how Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier's hatred became so real it nearly destroyed both their careers, which rivalry almost got the UFC banned from television, and here's the shocking revelation: which feud was so intense that Dana White had to hire security just for press conferences. But first, let me reveal something that's going to absolutely demolish everything you thought you knew about UFC rivalries. The most profitable fight in UFC history wasn't between the two best fighters. It was between the two fighters who genuinely wanted to destroy each other outside the cage. The evolution of UFC hatred. The Foundation era, 1993 to 2005, when respect ruled. Before we dive into the most venomous rivalries, you need to understand how dramatically the landscape has shifted. Early UFC was built on martial arts tradition, where fighters bowed to each other and showed mutual respect, regardless of the outcome. Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock established the template for what rivalries could become. Their initial encounter at UFC 1 was pure competition. No trash talk, no personal attacks, just two martial artists testing their skills. But when they met again at UFC 5, something had changed. The competitive fire had evolved into something more personal. Ken Shamrock represented the old school mentality where fights were settled in the cage and left there. But even he couldn't resist the pull of personal animosity when Royce's victories challenged everything he believed about fighting effectiveness. Years of repeated competition bred genuine dislike between them. By their third encounter, the respect had evaporated, replaced by a burning desire to prove superiority that went beyond sport. The transformation was gradual, but undeniable. What started as martial arts competition became personal warfare. Shamrock's frustration with losing to a smaller man who represented everything he thought was wrong with fighting created a resentment that would define both their careers. Tito Ortiz vs. Ken Shamrock took this foundation and amplified it to unprecedented levels. Ortiz represented the new generation. Brash, disrespectful, and willing to cross lines that previous fighters wouldn't dare approach. When Ortiz defeated Shamrock's Lions Den teammates Thierry Bollander and Guy Mezger, he didn't just win fights. He disrespected them afterward with his signature gravedigger celebration. Competition had transformed into psychological warfare, designed to humiliate opponents and their camps. Shamrock, the veteran who commanded respect throughout the fighting world, couldn't tolerate this disrespect from a young upstart. The personal nature of their conflict set the stage for every heated rivalry that followed. Ortiz understood something that previous fighters hadn't grasped. Controversy sells tickets. His deliberate provocations weren't just emotional outbursts. They were calculated business decisions that would reshape how fighters promoted themselves. The personality era, 2006 to 2013, when characters emerged. Chuck Liddell vs. Tito Ortiz represented the perfect storm of personality clash and competitive excellence. These weren't just training partners who grew apart. They were former friends, whose relationship deteriorated into authentic bitterness. What made their feud compelling was the backstory. Liddell and Ortiz had trained together, partied together, and considered each other brothers. But when title implications entered the picture, their friendship couldn't survive the competitive pressure. Ortiz's reluctance to fight Liddell while holding the title created resentment that festered for years. When they finally collided at UFC 47, the emotional investment from fans was unprecedented because everyone understood the personal stakes involved. The authenticity of their conflict resonated with audience in ways that scripted animosity never could. Broken relationships create the most compelling feuds, rather than manufactured drama. Liddell's knockout victory wasn't just a win, it was vindication for years of frustration. The image of Ortiz unconscious on the canvas while his former friend celebrated became one of the most iconic moments in UFC history. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen flipped the script entirely. Sonnen understood the controversy sells and deliberately crafted a villain persona designed to generate maximum hatred from fans and opponents alike. His verbal assault on Silva, Brazil, and everything the champion represented was calculated, created psychological warfare. Sonnen studied Silva's personality and attacked every aspect of his identity: his fighting style, his country, his team, even his manhood. What made this feud special was Silva's reaction. Typically calm and respectful, the Brazilian was genuinely angered by Sonnen's tactics. Even the most composed fighters have breaking points when opponents cross certain lines. Sonnen's approach was revolutionary because it proved that a fighter could become a star through talking, rather than just fighting. His ability to generate hatred made him more valuable to the UFC than many champions. If you love real stories over hype, hit subscribe. I break down the fights that truly mattered. The social media era, 2014 to present, when hatred went global. Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz changed everything about how rivalries develop and spread. Social media amplified their conflict beyond traditional fight promotion, creating a global phenomenon that transcended combat sports. McGregor's trash-talking ability was unprecedented. But Diaz possessed the perfect counter-personality, authentic, unfiltered, and completely immune to psychological manipulation. Their contrasting styles created natural, dramatic tension. The beauty of their feud was its unpredictability. McGregor's calculated mind games met Diaz's chaotic authenticity, producing moments that couldn't be scripted or manufactured. Press conferences became must-see television because nobody knew what would happen next. The genuine dislike between them was palpable, creating an electric atmosphere that made every interaction compelling. Diaz's famous "You're taking everything I worked for" call out at UFC 196 wasn't planned or rehearsed. It was pure emotion from a fighter who felt disrespected by McGregor's rapid rise. That authenticity made their rivalry feel real in ways that manufactured drama never could. The social media aspect added a new dimension to their feud. Fans could follow their beef in real time, watching insults fly back and forth on Twitter and Instagram. This constant engagement kept their rivalry alive between fights and created a global audience that extended far beyond traditional MMA fans. The most hated rivalries of all time. Number 10. Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira, the kickboxing nightmare. Before they ever faced off inside the cage, Pereira had already broken Adesanya twice in kickboxing, including a brutal knockout that haunted the future UFC champion for years. When both men entered the UFC, their past created an immediate psychological advantage for Pereira. Adesanya, typically confident and brash, showed visible tension whenever Pereira's name was mentioned. The mental warfare was subtle but devastating. Pereira didn't need to trash talk. His presence alone reminded Adesanya of his most painful defeats. This psychological edge made their UFC encounters must-see television. Some hatred runs deeper than words. The fear and respect born from previous violence created a dynamic that no amount of promotion could manufacture. Adesanya's journey to overcome his Pereira demons became one of the most compelling storylines in modern MMA. The psychological weight of those kickboxing losses affected every aspect of his UFC career until he could finally exorcise those ghosts. Pereira's knockout power translated perfectly to MMA, making him an immediate threat in the middleweight division. His left hook carried the same devastating force that had dropped Adesanya years earlier, creating genuine fear in opponents who had seen the damage it could cause. Adesanya's eventual revenge at UFC 287 was sweet, but the psychological scars from their kickboxing encounters will forever define their relationship. Even in victory, you could see the relief in Adesanya's eyes, finally conquering the demon that had haunted him for years. And we're 9. Ronda Rousey versus Miesha Tate, the original Women's War. Before women's MMA was mainstream, Rousey and Tate were building a feud that would define the division for years. Their animosity began in Strikeforce and intensified when both moved to the UFC. Rousey's arrogance clashed perfectly with Tate's determination to prove herself against the sport's biggest star. Their contrasting personalities, Rousey's manufactured confidence versus Tate's authentic grit, created natural, dramatic tension. The Ultimate Fighter season, featuring both women as coaches, showcased their genuine dislike. Viewers witnessed real animosity developing over weeks of forced interaction, making their eventual fight feel personal rather not professional. This feud established the template for women's MMA rivalries and proved that female fighters could generate the same emotional investment as their male counterparts. What made this particularly nasty was Rousey's refusal to show any respect even after defeating Tate twice. The lack of sportsmanship from the champion created lasting resentment that extended far beyond their fighting careers. Tate's persistence in pursuing Rousey despite 2 losses showed incredible mental toughness. She refused to be intimidated by Rousey's aura of invincibility and continued pushing for opportunities to prove herself. The personal nature of their conflict was evident in every interaction. Rousey seemed to take genuine pleasure in Tate's failures, while Tate's determination to dethrone the champion became an obsession that defined her career. Number 8. Colby Covington versus Jorge Masvidal, when friendships explode. Former training partners and close friends, Covington and Masvidal's relationship deteriorated when Covington's political persona began affecting their gym atmosphere. Their conflict represents the most personal betrayal in modern MMA. Masvidal felt that Covington's controversial statements were bringing negative attention to their team and disrespecting their shared Miami roots. The political divide between them made reconciliation impossible. What ignited this war wasn't just competition, it was betrayal. The most heartbreaking aspect was watching former best friends who had supported each other through difficult times become bitter enemies. The feud culminated in a backstage altercation that resulted in criminal charges, proving that some feuds extend far beyond professional competition. The legal ramifications showed how real their hatred had become. Covington's transformation from relatively unknown fighter to controversial heel was partly responsible for destroying his friendship with Masvidal. The persona that made him famous also cost him one of his closest relationships. Masvidal's street Jesus image clashed directly with Covington's political character, creating an irreconcilable difference that went beyond fighting. Their opposing worldviews made coexistence impossible. The gym atmosphere at American Top Team became toxic as other fighters were forced to choose sides. The conflict affected the entire team and created lasting divisions that extended far beyond the two main participants. Number 7. Tito Ortiz versus Ken Shamrock, the generational war. It wasn't supposed to get personal, but it did. Ortiz represented the new generation of fighters who understood that personality could be as important as fighting ability. Shamrock embodied old-school values of respect and tradition, making Ortiz's disrespectful antics particularly offensive to him. The conflict became a battle between fighting philosophies as much as personal animosity. The trilogy of fights spanning several years kept fans invested in their ongoing drama. Each encounter added new layers to their conflict, creating a soap opera that captivated audiences. Ortiz's dominance in all three fights made the feud even more painful for Shamrock, who watched his legacy being dismantled by someone he considered disrespectful and unworthy. Shamrock's attempts to teach Ortiz respect through violence backfired spectacularly. Each loss to the younger fighter only reinforced Ortiz's belief that the old ways are obsolete. The generational divide represented by their feud extended beyond just these two fighters. Ortiz became the face of a new era where personality and promotion were as important as fighting skills. Shamrock's frustration was palpable in every interview and press conference. He genuinely couldn't understand how someone he viewed as disrespectful could be so successful. Number 6. Chuck Liddell versus Tito Ortiz, the friendship that died. Former training partners whose relationship couldn't survive championship implications, Liddell and Ortiz created the blueprint for personal rivalries in MMA. The conflict felt authentic because it was rooted in real friendship that deteriorated under competitive pressure. Fans understood the emotional stakes because they witnessed a relationship breakdown in real time. Anticipation for their first fight was unprecedented because everyone knew how much it meant to both men personally. Broken bonds create more compelling feuds than manufactured drama. Liddell's knockout victory at UFC 47 was devastating, not just physically, but emotionally for Ortiz, who had to watch his former friend celebrate over his unconscious body. The backstory of their friendship made every interaction more meaningful. When former friends fight, every word carries extra weight because of the shared history and broken trust. Ortiz's reluctance to fight Liddell while champion created years of tension that couldn't be resolved through conversation. Only violence could settle the question of who was better. Liddell's patient pursuit of the fight showed incredible mental strength. He waited years for his opportunity and never let the personal nature of the conflict affect his preparation. Number 5. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen, the master versus the mouth. Sonnen's verbal assault on Silva and everything he represented created one of the most one-sided psychological campaigns in sports history. His calculated disrespect was designed to anger Silva and generate maximum controversy. Silva's typically demeanor cracked under Sonnen's relentless attacks, showing that even the most composed champions have breaking points. The Brazilians' emotional response made their conflict feel genuine rather than promotional. The first fight became legendary because Sonnen backed up his words with performance, dominating Silva for 4 rounds before getting submitted. The dramatic finish validated both men's approaches to the feud. The rematch was even more personal, with Sonnen doubling down on his disrespectful tactics. Silva's second-round knockout was delivered with visible anger, showing how deeply the American's words had affected him. Sonnen's approach was revolutionary because it proved that talking could be as valuable as fighting. His ability to generate hatred made him one of the biggest draws in the sport, despite never winning a title.
Silva's restraint throughout most of the build-up made his eventual emotional responses more impactful. When the normally calm champion showed anger, it felt significant because it was so rare. The cultural elements of their feud added extra layers of meaning. Sonnen's attacks on Brazil and Silva's heritage touched on themes that resonated far beyond individual competition. Number 4. John Jones versus Rashad Evans, the student versus the teacher. Evans discovered Jones and helped bring him to the UFC, making their eventual conflict particularly painful for both men. The feud represented the classic mentor-student relationship gone wrong. Jones's rapid rise to championship contention created tension with Evans, who felt betrayed when his protege began targeting his title. The personal nature of their conflict made every interaction uncomfortable. The fight settled the competitive question, but the emotional damage to their relationship was permanent. Success can destroy even the strongest bonds in competitive environments. Evans' visible hurt during press conferences was painful to watch, as he struggled to understand how someone he'd helped could turn against him so completely. The mentor-student dynamic made their conflict particularly tragic. Evans had genuinely cared about Jones's development, making the betrayal feel more personal than typical competitive rivalry. Jones's youth and ambition clashed with Evans' established position, creating an inevitable conflict that neither man could avoid. The title implications made their friendship unsustainable. Evans' attempts to maintain some level of respect throughout their feud showed his character, but also highlighted how one-sided the animosity had become. Number 3. Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz, the clash of personalities. McGregor's calculated mind games met Diaz's authentic chaos, creating the perfect storm of personality conflict. Their contrasting approaches to promotion and fighting created natural dramatic tension. Diaz's immunity to McGregor's psychological tactics frustrated the Irishman and created compelling viewing for fans. Press conferences became unpredictable because neither man would back down. The feud transcended fighting because it represented different philosophies about success, authenticity, and what it means to be a fighter. The cultural impact extended far beyond the octagon. The beauty of their rivalry was that both men remained true to themselves throughout, creating authentic moments that couldn't be scripted or manufactured. McGregor's precision with words met Diaz's raw honesty, creating a dynamic that felt fresh and unpredictable. Neither man could gain a psychological advantage because their approaches were so fundamentally different. The rematch proved that their animosity was real and lasting. Both men genuinely disliked each other, making every exchange feel authentic rather than promotional. Number 2. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor, when cultures collide. The feud escalated beyond sport when McGregor attacked Khabib's bus at UFC 223, injuring multiple fighters and creating genuine legal consequences. The incident transformed their conflict from professional to personal. Khabib's post-fight brawl at UFC 229 showed how deeply McGregor's attacks had affected him. The Dagestani's emotional response proved that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. The rivalry generated global attention because it touched on themes of religion, culture, and respect that resonated far beyond fighting fans. The cultural implications made their conflict feel historically significant. The aftermath of their fight, with both men facing suspensions and legal issues, showed how their hatred had real-world consequences that extended far beyond entertainment. McGregor's attacks on Khabib's religion, family, and culture crossed lines that most fighters wouldn't dare approach. The personal nature of his insults created genuine hatred that couldn't be resolved through competition. Khabib's dominance in their fight was as much about proving a point as winning a championship. He wanted to punish McGregor for his disrespect and show the world that actions have consequences. The global attention their feud generated proved that MMA had become a truly international sport, capable of capturing worldwide attention through compelling storylines. Number 1. John Jones versus Daniel Cormier. Pure, unfiltered hatred. No feud in UFC history has featured more authentic animosity than Jones versus Cormier. Their hatred was so real that it made every interaction uncomfortable to watch. The initial press conference brawls set the tone for years of authentic conflict. Unlike manufactured drama, their dislike was visceral and impossible to fake. Cormier's emotional breakdowns during press conferences showed how deeply Jones affected him psychologically. The mental warfare was so intense that it damaged both men's reputations. The feud proved that some people are simply incompatible on a fundamental level. No amount of time or success could heal the wounds created by their conflict. Even years after their fighting careers ended, both men still speak about each other with visible disdain, proving that their hatred was genuine and lasting. Jones' ability to get under Cormier's skin was masterful and cruel. He understood exactly which buttons to push to make the normally composed wrestler lose his composure completely. Cormier's tears during their press conferences weren't an act. They were the genuine emotional response of a man who felt disrespected and humiliated by someone he considered morally inferior. The personal nature of their attacks went far beyond typical fight promotion. They genuinely wanted to hurt each other emotionally, not just physically. The psychology behind the hatred. What separates legendary rivalries from forgettable feuds isn't just fighting ability. It's the psychological elements that make conflicts feel authentic and emotionally compelling. The most effective rivalries tap into universal themes that audiences can relate to: betrayal, jealousy, cultural differences, and personal disrespect. When fighters embody these conflicts, fans become emotionally invested in the outcomes. Successful rivalries also require perfect casting. The personalities must clash in ways that create natural dramatic tension without feeling forced or artificial. The best feuds evolve organically over time, with each interaction adding new layers to the conflict. Manufactured drama feels hollow compared to authentic animosity that develops naturally. Psychological warfare has become as important as physical preparation in modern MMA. Fighters who can get inside their opponents' heads gain significant advantages before the fight even begins. The most compelling rivalries often reveal deeper truths about human nature, our capacity for loyalty, betrayal, forgiveness, and revenge. They become mirrors that reflect our own emotional experiences. The business of hatred. UFC executives understand that rivalry sells better than pure athletic competition. The most profitable fights in company history have featured personal animosity rather than just championship implications. McGregor vs. Khabib generated over $180 million in revenue because fans were emotionally invested in seeing their conflict resolved. The personal stakes made the fight feel more important than typical title bouts. The promotion actively encourages rivalry development through press conferences, social media, and reality shows designed to create friction between fighters. However, the line between promotion and genuine hatred can become blurred, sometimes creating real-world consequences that extend far beyond entertainment. The UFC's business model increasingly depends on creating compelling narratives that make fans care about fight outcomes beyond just athletic competition. Social media has amplified the business value of rivalries by allowing conflicts to develop and spread in real time, creating constant engagement between fight announcements. The dark side of rivalries. While rivalries generate excitement and revenue, they can also create lasting psychological damage for the participants. The pressure to maintain animosity for promotional purposes can be mentally exhausting. Some fighters struggle to separate their promotional personas from their authentic selves, leading to identity confusion and personal problems outside the cage. The most intense rivalries often leave permanent scars on the participants' relationships and mental health, raising questions about the ethical implications of promoting genuine hatred for entertainment. Real hatred can consume fighters and affect their performance, relationships, and overall well-being long after their careers end. The line between entertainment and exploitation becomes blurred when promoters encourage genuine animosity for profit without considering the long-term consequences for fighters. Future of UFC rivalries. Modern social media has accelerated rivalry development, allowing conflicts to escalate quickly and reach global audiences instantly. Future feuds will likely be even more intense and far-reaching. The international expansion of MMA creates opportunities for cultural conflicts that resonate with global audiences, potentially creating rivalries that transcend sport entirely. However, increased awareness of mental health issues may lead to more careful management of rivalry promotion to protect fighters' psychological well-being. The next generation of fighters has grown up watching these legendary feuds, understanding both their promotional value and their potential dangers. Virtual reality and enhanced social media platforms will likely create new ways for rivalries to develop and be experienced by fans worldwide. From broken friendships to cultural clashes, the most hated rivalries in UFC history represent the perfect fusion of athletic competition and human drama. These conflicts remind us why we're drawn to combat sports. They reveal authentic human emotions under the most intense pressure imaginable. Each legendary feud tells a story about pride, respect, betrayal, and the lengths people will go to prove their superiority. They transform athletic contests into emotional experiences that resonate long after the final bell. These rivalries weren't built in the gym. They were forged through betrayal, pride, and raw emotion. And that's what makes them legendary. Drop your pick for the most intense UFC feud in the comments. I'll feature the best takes in the next video. Subscribe for the stories that made MMA what it is today.